Dismounting his horse, Mustafa carefully adjusts his kaftan, surreptitiously fingering his gold-embroidered sash, the ribbed lines of thread centering his thoughts, steadying his hands. He looks over his shoulder and nods to his generals, signaling they are to remain behind. He stands tall and confidently strides into his father's tent. But before his eyes can adjust to the candlelight within, he feels two strong hands encircle his neck. Instinct erupts. Mustafa slams into his assailant, knocking his skull against theirs before jerking forward, the surprise movement forcing the would-be assassin over his head and onto the ground. Straightening his muscular frame, he only just manages to whip his attention to the right before he feels the punch to his ribs. He staggers backward and clutches his side. Unable to breathe, he wills his eyes open and forces them to focus. Two enormous men dressed in fine black silk rush toward him. Immediately, he understands. His fate has been sealed. His mother and generals were right. He should have heeded their warnings. Not that he had a choice. When Suleiman the Magnificent requests your presence on the battlefield, you do not delay. You do not debate. Putting any fears aside, Mustafa had dutifully made haste to his father's side. After riding through the night, he is now exhausted, and he almost gives in. He almost gives up. There is no escape. Why should he fight? But in his final moments, his father's voice rings in his ear. Get up. You are my son. It is your honor to die for this empire. Do not fail me now. Royal blood pumps through his veins. He is Shahzadeh Mustafa, prince of the royal blood. But for the first time, the weight of his lofty title feels heavy, like the enormous rubies hanging round his neck. Mustafa draws in a deep breath, feeling the rush of air into his lungs. He is a son of the empire. He was born to fight for the throne, even to the death. And if his time is now, then he will die with honor. Mustafa stands up, shoulders back, chin out strong. He faces his fate. He faces the will of his father. And he fights, not for his life, but for his honor. When the deed is done, Mustafa's lifeless body is thrown onto the ground in front of the Sultan's tent, proof of death. The thin bowstring is still wrapped around his neck, the only visible blemish on his lifeless body. But beneath his royal finery, his mortal body is riddled with bruises, gashes, and cuts, evidence of an honorable death. A horrible one, painful and long, but honorable, a princely death. Suleiman emerges from a neighboring tent, his face expressionless. He glances at the body, but does not allow his gaze to dwell on his eldest son and heir. He wishes to remember him as he was in life, strong, confident, noble. Perhaps too strong, too confident, and too noble. Suleiman draws in a deep breath, feeling the air rush into his lungs, something his Mustafa will never do again. Just like his brave son, Suleiman pulls his shoulders back and juts his chin forward in strength, and he faces his fate. He faces the will of his father, and his father before him, and his father before him. For he too had fought, not for his life, but for his dynasty.
Hey y'all, I'm Erica.
And I'm Caroline. And today we're bringing you another episode of the Pithy Chronicle, History with a Bite.
Better than a soap opera.
Spicier than a ghost pepper.
Sexier, if possible, than Bridgerton.
Our historical retellings are guaranteed to entertain.
We're here to prove that history is just another reality show, except unscripted.
So let's open up the book and jump in. And the time it takes you to drive to work, we promise to fascinate, surprise, and enlighten you.
All you have to do is listen.
Are you hungry yet?
I want to jump into this question right away, and I want to be explicitly clear here. Did you just narrate Suleiman the Magnificent, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, committing filicide for his son's own good?
Well, not technically, but Mustafa was murdered on his father's orders.
I feel like that is a minor technicality.
True enough.
So, okay, but like...
Oh, you want to know why?
I, along with everybody listening, I am absolutely intrigued. Tell me.
Excellent. I'm so glad you're intrigued. Well, let's start at the beginning, shall we?
A very good place to start.
Oh my gosh. Love that you did
I'm
that.
so sorry. I'm so sorry.
It's amazing. Okay. As you said, Suleiman the Magnificent was Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. He ruled for 45 years during the 16th century, and he earned his moniker Magnificent for his courage and tactics in battle, his devotion to his people, and his empire's vast riches. But that isn't why we're discussing him today. Today, we are focusing on Suleiman the Maverick.
Oh, that's delightful.
Thank you. The Ottoman Empire was built on traditions. Things were done a certain way, and these views were firmly entrenched by the time Suleiman took the throne in 1520, aged 26, and the 10th Ottoman Sultan. But within a year of his ascension, Suleiman began to break the rules. He went against centuries of protocols, upended established relationships, and redefined life within the Ottoman court, all for one woman. For every maverick needs a goose. And for Suleiman, her name was Hürrem.
I love it, but I gotta laugh. I always knew there was something there.
I couldn't help it. It just wrote itself.
You've got that love and feeling. Gosh, that is the epitome of romance.
It must have been romantic. I can't disagree. Together, Suleiman and Hürrem are one of the most famous love stories of history. It was well known not just in the Ottoman Empire, but across the globe, even during their day, because the Venetian ambassadors were especially gossipy.
Gossipy or pithy?
Oh, I like that. But no, they were just gossipy.
Listen, if you don't have anything nice to say, come sit by me.
They were not succinct at all. They wrote pages. I don't know if gossipy is exactly a word, but they were sincerely following this relationship and reporting back every little thing to their superiors in Venice, who then spread it across Europe. And while it seems ridiculous that Europeans would be interested in a foreign ruler's choice of lover,
good gossip is always good gossip.
This podcast is about the historical tea and these Venetians, man.
They are
these
serving
Venetians,
it up.
They had a brewing cup. Okay. To understand why Suleiman and Hürrem were so groundbreaking, let's talk harem.
I would love to talk harem. So I have a basic understanding, and I do mean very basic, of what a harem is, but I'm afraid it's largely based on Hollywood representations, which obviously are extremely accurate.
Yeah. Well, most Western representations of a harem are wildly oversexed and overdramatized. Orientalism, or the Western construction of the East based on prejudices and superficial observations, completely distorted the word. What European men couldn't see firsthand, they imagined, filling in the blanks as needed. A harem, oh, I loved your eye roll. Lovely. Listeners, did you hear it? It practically creaked. A harem, in its true definition, is the private world of the Sultan's female relatives, including his mother, sisters, aunts, children, concubines, and all of their various attendants. It also included eunuchs, who were men that could be trusted to protect, but never touch.
Well, that is a lot of estrogen.
Oh yeah, and a lot of competition. It's like a sorority house on steroids, you gotta know. Concubines weren't the only ones vying for the Sultan's attention. All of these women were hoping to win his favor in one way or another. But it was orderly. Tradition dictated a strict hierarchy. The Sultan's mother, the Valide Sultan, was officially the head of the female household and unofficially the Sultan's eyes and ears within the harem, as well as the capital, Istanbul, when the Sultan was away. The second highest female was the Lady Steward, mistress of palace operations and monitor of etiquette and ceremony. Basically...
My God, if this is not my dream job.
I was going to say basically Erica's dream job. You will note that neither of those positions are romantic in nature.
No.
The Valide Sultan was the major female presence in the Sultan's life.
So I will say that's very nice, very pleasant, but no one likes a mama's boy. And I believe the phrase is happy wife, happy life. So not quite the same as happy mom. That doesn't really work.
It ruins the rhyme.
It does. It ruins the rhyme, and we love a rhyme. Though in his case, it might have been happy wives, which rather ruins the rhyme. Anyway, it feels a bit weird that the ruler of an entire Ottoman Empire is still so attached to his mom.
Well, the mother was central to the Sultan's life because he never married. Unlike Imperial China, and I'm sure many other examples, the Sultan did not take multiple wives. Rather, he had many concubines.
Well, that seems like a matter of nomenclature, but potato, am I right?
No, not in this case. It's more like potato shepherd's pie.
Okay.
The Sultan didn't marry for a few very important reasons, and these unique situations meant that a serious romantic or even prolonged relationship between himself and a woman was almost impossible.
What kind of reasons, though?
Well, to be a concubine of the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, you must first be born a Christian.
All right, so that doesn't really... I'm not seeing the through line here, so get any more information.
From the early 15th century, sultans chose to only father children with Christian-born women who were taken from the empire's borderlands or beyond. These women were usually captured from their homes and sold on the slave market. Occasionally, women were gifted to the Sultan. Sometimes women were purchased as slaves for the harem and then were noticed and promoted to concubine. And sometimes women were purchased for the exact purpose of enticing the Sultan.
Wow, okay, so I've got a lot of thoughts on that. Just to be clear, he insisted upon Christian enslaved women. But like what?
Not just he, but yes, they. Like
they.
For generations, yes. These enslaved females were converted to Islam and assimilated into the Ottoman culture. They were taught Turkish, a necessity, and if they showed promise as a possible concubine, they were educated in history, poetry, needlework, music, and, of course, the finer points of Muhammadan law.
But why wouldn't they want noble-born Muslim women? I realize I'm using Western Europe as a precedent, but wouldn't they be concerned about purity of the blood, keeping the noble lines noble, but also veracity of the conversion?
I had some of those exact same questions because I just thought this was bizarre. So I went looking. Here's the main reason. Enslaved women had no familial ties, and this meant there were no nosy nobles trying to wheedle their way up the ladder by throwing daughters at the Sultan.
Okay, I see you throwing shade at the Boleyns and the Howards and the Woodvilles.
I mean, they were actually contemporaries, not the Woodvilles, but definitely the Boleyns and the Howards. Anne Boleyn married Henry only a year before Hürrem and Suleiman tied the knot. Oh, crap. Spoiler alert, but we will come back to that.
I swear, it always comes back to Anne Boleyn with us. All right, history buffs, new game. 6 Degrees of Anne Boleyn. I dare you. Go.
You know, that would actually make an awesome puzzle. Maybe we could add something about 6 degrees of separation as like a puzzle for our patrons on Patreon to really get those historical juices flowing.
Okay, move over, New York Times crossword puzzle.
Erica's eyes literally just lit up. I think that would be super fun to see how people connect the dots, because there would be a lot of options. Okay, that's a rabbit hole, which I am against.
Not pissy, Caroline.
Thank you, Erica. Okay, back to the harem. Enslaved women have no familial ties. That also means no other family could rise to power through grandchildren. Additionally, there was no one to fight for the concubine if it was deemed her treatment was unfair.
Well, that is certainly a consolidation of power.
It is. In fact,
Yeah.
I found one article that asserted the royal dynasty chose Christian slaves because it wouldn't be right to subject good, noble, upstanding Muslim women to such a life. Also, there is a Muslim law that one Muslim cannot enslave another, so that's why Christians especially were preferred.
Wow, that really stings. It makes this whole thing feel like a breeding operation.
And you're not wrong. These women were wombs and protectors. It's important to remember that when the Valide Sultan chose potential women for her son, and yes, let that sink in for a minute, talk about your mommy issues. She wanted them to be beautiful, yes, because obviously he needed to desire to consummate the relationship.
Heaven forbid he be forced to sleep with an unattractive woman.
Never. That could not be. But the Sultan's mother was mostly looking for, well, future mothers. The dynasty wanted heirs, lots of them. And so every concubine was an opportunity to produce another child. And every child of the Sultan needed to be reared with love, respect, strength, courage, dignity, yada, yada, yada. They obviously just had to be perfect. Intelligent, competitive, striking concubines bore and raised intelligent, competitive, and striking sons.
Naturally.
And the concubines were expected to switch roles from sexual partner to mother immediately.
Yep. So easy. 180.
Yeah. It does feel like a pretty big switch, but this was their defined role. Concubines could only have one son with the Sultan. After that, their sexual relationship with him was over. From then on, they were expected to dedicate their entire lives to their son and his future as a Shehzadeh and hopefully the next Sultan.
So what if, just guessing here, they had a girl?
Girls were actually very well loved and valued.
Wow, that is such a nice change.
It's such a nice change to historical precedent. Despite being the home of many enslaved women, the harem was one of the most comprehensive institutions of higher learning for women. It gave women with ambition options, and daughters, unlike sons, were not sent away in their teenage years, sometimes as young as 12, to govern faraway provinces and learn how to rule while on the job. Daughters got to stay. Daughters also weren't waiting around for you to die so that they could try and take your throne. That likely allowed daughters and fathers to bond in a different, less competitive way. So, to answer your question, if a concubine had a girl, she could remain in the harem and continue to lie with the Sultan unless or until she bore a son, and then out.
But why out? If you find a woman, and please forgive me for what I'm about to say, if you find a strong, capable, intelligent, sexy woman who gets pregnant easy, survives childbirth, and bears sons, why wouldn't he want to keep her around? I mean, was it boredom? Or was he just expected to present this virile front that one woman just can't satisfy me, I have to have many? Tell me.
That does, we've talked about that before with kings and how to prove their manliness, they must sleep around. But no, that was not the main reason, although I'm sure that did have
some bearing.
Some bearing, exactly. And I also am sure that many Europeans interpreted it as such. These men are just so lustful, they have to have more. But no, concubines could only bear one son because the Ottoman Empire did not believe in primogeniture.
Meaning the first legitimate child, son, gets the throne.
Exactly. The Ottomans found, rightly, that this could lead to some serious losers running the entire empire.
And Lord have mercy. Historically, there is a lot of precedent for idiot firstborns destroying dynasties.
Precisely. And while they handpicked the mothers, educated them to exacting specifications, and groomed them for a life of motherhood, there are no guarantees. Prior to the Ottoman Empire, Turkish rulers often divided the country into regions amongst their sons, hoping to prevent civil war. But this, as we all know, weakens a state, and it quickly led to disaster. So the Ottomans took note. They were very perceptive. And when they rose to power, they ensured that the strongest male would take the lot.
I can't imagine the other brothers were too happy about that. And it puts a lot of pressure on dear old dad to choose wisely.
Oh, no. There was no choosing. While the Sultan may have had his favorites, he was at least supposed to keep his preferences to himself. According to tradition, he was to educate them all equally, send them away at equivalent ages to govern far-off regions, and allow all the chance to prove themselves in battle. Basically, give each kid, son, a fighting chance. And a fight it was, because once the Sultan died, the race was on.
Last one there's a rotten egg.
Well, it's more like first one there takes the throne and murders all his brothers and nephews.
Oh, okay. That's grim. That's grim.
It's so grim. Yes. But you did hear me correctly. Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror's law of governance imparted the right of executing male members of the dynasty to his son, aka letting his son kill his other sons to prevent interregnum. Quote, "Any of my sons ascend the throne, it is acceptable for him to kill his brothers for the common benefit of the people. The majority of the ulama, Muslim scholars, have approved this. Let the action be taken accordingly."
So matter-of-fact, and so darkly matter-of-fact. So to keep the country from falling to civil war, or to ensure the government was never suspended for 2 or more dynastic claims, they could freely kill their own family.
That's the gist, yeah.
I feel like that's another something aside.
Mm-hmm, yeah. We're gonna get to other asides, don't worry. Osman
Nice.
Ghazi, founder of the Ottoman state in 1298, killed his uncle, Dundar Bey, to prevent an usurpation.
What a name.
What a name. And the rest, as they say, is history. Mehmed I Çelebi, the 4th Sultan of the empire, said, quote, "My ancestors handled some inconveniences with their experience. 2 sultans cannot live in the same country."
A man cannot serve 2 masters, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around this.
It definitely took me a while, and as I was researching this, I was like yelling out facts to my husband. His jaw was dropping. But the Ottoman sultans believed that they were sacrificing their own lives and those of their children for the greater good of their people.
Mm-hmm. So why not just choose your best son for the job?
I think it boils down to man's nature. More often than not, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's my personal opinion that not many men, or frankly women, could see a dangling carrot like this one and not chase it. Even if the Sultan chose a successor, the chances that his brothers would accept his decision once he was gone were slim.
If they waited until he was actually gone.
Exactly. Keeping your sons eyeing each other also lessens the probability that they will turn on you. And killing your own brothers means that there aren't any potential threats throughout your reign. While disturbing, it does make some kind of sense, and many scholars throughout history have agreed. Not that we're promoting fratricide, just to clarify.
No, please don't lay that at my door. But I think we need to have a side count.
A count?
Yeah. We've already had filicide and fratricide.
Oh, don't worry, there's more sides. I'm coming for you, girl. I got you. And that is why concubines could only have 1 son. Their entire job after giving birth was to mold their baby into a man. A strong man, a capable man, a man who could one day rush to his father's deathbed and murder all his brothers.
You know, that's a big ask. But I suppose having 2 sons would mean watching them try to kill each other, which is not ideal for a parent.
No, you've hit the nail on the head. While the system did, quote, work, producing talented leaders whose rivalry spurred them forward, the violence definitely took a toll. The empire, its people, had favorites, and sometimes those favorites did not win. And of course, there's the mothers. They were left alone with a lifetime of grief and sadness. So if a woman were to have 2 sons in the fray, she might lose doubly or be forced to live with the knowledge that one killed the other. That's painful stuff.
Starting to see the light, or at least the logic. 1 son per concubine. I also see why they didn't want to inflict this on one of their own, as bad as that sounds. First, they were captured, taken from their families, friends, their countries, and religions, forced to convert. And then they had to survive an arduous journey in hopes that they might make it to a slave market. And that's the hope, which is not a good hope.
That's like if they're lucky, they get scooped up by the crown.
Exactly. And then only then, if their beauty captured the attention, were they given the opportunity to sleep with a man they've probably most likely never met before.
Mm-hmm.
Should they then get, quote, lucky and bear a son, they would have the, quote, honor of raising a capable, strong leader who more than likely was going to die before his natural lifetime. Only if their son murdered all of his half-brothers would this woman's troubles be over.
Yep.
And not even over. Let's just
Not even over. No, not even over.
Beginning.
Just beginning, because then she would be the Valide Sultan, and she would get to rule the harem and pick out new concubines to go through this entire ordeal once more.
Once more.
Yeah.
Oh, hashtag goals? No, I think not. I think not.
No. But I don't think that these women had the option of saying no.
It certainly doesn't sound like it.
It does not. Okay. This is the world in which Suleiman was raised. This was his precedent. His father, Selim I, was one of those upstart princes. He forcibly overthrew his father, who mysteriously died while on the way to his forced retirement.
Daggum, patricide? What's next? That's our third side.
Third side. Just wait. Selim defeated his 2 older brothers and executed them. Actually, he had 7 brothers, but 5 were already dead. However, their deaths did not spare their sons. Selim sent agents to find and execute all of his nephews, the sons of all 7 brothers. And remember, these guys all got concubines, which means they could have lots of children. No stone was left unturned.
There actually is a word for murdering one's nephews, but I don't know what it is.
Is it? We have to find out. Okay.
Murder of nephews. Term. Types of killing Wikipedia.
That is horrifying. I can't believe that exists.
The killing of a nephew is nepoticide.
Nepoticide, here we come. So while we have learned that word, I'm going to add one more. Filicide. Selim decided to make his own choice. He executed 4 of his sons to pave the way for Suleiman. Perhaps it was a small act of mercy, sparing his final heir the painful fate of fratricide. I don't know. Or maybe he was just ruthless. It's kind of hard to say.
No, sorry. Not hard to say. I think it's quite clear that he was pretty heartless.
He was known as the resolute and ferocious, so fitting. Either way, Suleiman grew up with the knowledge that his father had murdered his grandfather, all his uncles, all his male cousins, and all his brothers. That had to weigh heavily. Remember when I said that daughters were treasured? This is why. Fathers just couldn't have a normal relationship with their sons. Not only did the Sultan live in a separate palace from the harem, away from the concubines and children, he also didn't continue to have a loving or any kind of relationship with his sons' mothers. So there was no connection there. Furthermore, every sultan was keenly aware of the fate that lay in store for their children and of the precedent for patricide. And finally, at a very young age, they were sent away with their mothers to get some hands-on leadership experience far away from Istanbul. It's not like they could FaceTime to keep up the bond, which is why sultans' entire lives were centered around their mother. Back to that. Which opens up a whole other can of worms for a different day.
These men, and possibly myself, need a therapist couch to talk about these mommy issues.
Mom was everything. Dad was scary and distant and intimidating. Brothers were potential murderers, and so were sons. They were really left out in the cold all alone.
Yeah, I can't decide if I feel sorry for these men. I mean, while you paint a pitiful picture, there were definitely some perks, maybe?
Oh yeah, obviously. While he had many royal duties that did not involve bedding women, it was one of his most important tasks. The more sons he had to choose from, or perhaps the more sons competing for the throne, the better chances the empire gets a good one.
The logic is still killing me. But also,
Agreed.
maybe you should have less sons.
That would be one way to do
so you
it.
don't have to kill so many. Maybe killing less people would be a good idea for once.
And yet. Sultans, Suleiman included, would visit their mothers and sisters in the old palace where the harem was located. And when they would deign to drop in, which wasn't always very often considering their job was to run an empire, the first priority was likely to spend time with the senior women of the harem, mom, and then any concubines who had already bore him children, and perhaps maybe even his sisters. He would then either be kind of on the lookout or perhaps introduced to new concubines, often by his mom. Europeans, especially our gossiping Venetians, see, they're back, they never leave, loved to keep track of Suleiman's love life. In the first years of his reign, he was described as, quote, very lustful and a prince you could love.
Oh, what is with these Italians and the fascination with the bedroom, particularly this man's bedroom?
Yes, but to be fair, we're doing an entire podcast on it now.
I'm gonna pretend that that's different. I'm gonna pretend because I can't make the good argument.
You can't admit that we are also interested in his bedroom.
We're different.
We are doing it from a historical and definitely not a gossipy perspective.
Not.
They were fascinated because it was really juicy gossip, like we've already talked about. There were no People magazines or sleazy tabloids. No BuzzFeed articles popping up in your browser asserting absurd statements about moderately famous people. There was just this guy, richer than Croesus, who could have any woman in the world. A man who would inspect a lineup of females and drop his handkerchief in front of the one he found most desirable. He was absolutely fascinating, especially to the Western world that had nothing like him with which to compare. And when he went rogue, well, that made him all the more fascinating.
All right, I'm putting the helmet on. I am ready to go all Top Gun on this guy.
Maverick and Goose, here we come. Legend says Suleiman caught a glimpse of her while visiting his mother just weeks into his reign as Sultan. No one who met her in person ever wrote about her, with the exception of Suleiman himself, who was a prolific poet. And she was his muse. Quote, my woman of the beautiful hair, my love of the slanted brow, my love of eyes full of misery, unquote. Also, eyes full of misery is not a great way to describe the love of your life, but whatevs.
Doesn't scream to me, that's the woman I'm taking to the bedroom.
It really doesn't, but that's what he thought all the same. But the Venetian ambassador of the time claimed that she was, quote, young but not beautiful, although graceful and petite. Erica, there are 3 portraits that we have of her, or actually, there are 3 portraits that we think are of her. Given her life of seclusion within the harem, she was not often seen in public, especially by men. But we do believe that this work by a follower of Titian may be as accurate an image as we'll ever get. Would you please describe her for our audience?
Am I supposed to be glowing about this woman because she's not especially...
Is this not what you pictured?
This was not what I pictured.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know, I guess I was thinking a rounder, more full face. And
cherubian kind of a...
Yeah, very cherubic. Like,
it looks angry.
She does not look like someone that I would feel comfortable. She's a little scary.
She is a little scary. I will say that there is a portrait by Titian where she is more...
Western.
Of the cherub effect. And looks much more Western, and you can see that she does have long red hair, which isn't in this image. But this one seems to me most accurate. You can really see the miserable eyes and the slanted brow there.
Right.
And also, she's not presented in Western clothing. Here she is in much more of the traditional garb.
I do really like the depiction of the non-Western garb because it just is absolutely beautiful. The colors are incredibly rich. You can see that the jewelry is stunning. The pearls and the rubies are set so finely. I mean, I can't even imagine what this would have cost. Overall, not exactly a woman that I would think would catch a man's eye.
No, she's very pale, and she has bags under her eyes, like legitimate bags.
Yeah.
And this is in like the portrait about her to make her seem special. Now, again, this isn't a commissioned portrait, which I think is important to understand. This is a portrait based on what he heard. I don't think this follower of Titian ever met her. We don't have a portrait of someone who met her in person. But this is how they saw her. And I think we'll get there eventually, but she was not always considered to be kind. Conniving, tenacious. You can kind of see those in her features.
Absolutely. Now that you say that, fox-like, especially now that you say that those are more of her traits.
Yeah, fox-like. I really like that, fox-like. So, this is the woman who shattered the domed ceiling and redefined women's role within the Ottoman court, its politics, the empire. For a woman who captivated European imaginations, we really know pretty much nothing about her origins. Scholars are unsure of her birth name, her birthplace, her birth date. So first, who was she? Some authors propose that her original name was Anastasia or Alexandra Lisowska, but that is conjecture. It is guessed that she was born in Ruthenia, which was an eastern region of the Kingdom of Poland and is now a part of Ukraine. And as she became known in the Ottoman court and beyond, the name Roxolana, meaning the Ruthenian, was adopted by most to describe her. But to Suleiman, her name was Hürrem, his cheerful one in Persian.
After seeing her portrait, that is not the name I would have gone with.
No.
But what did you go with?
Well, I did really debate it, and not because she doesn't look cheerful, but yeah. I felt that the name that we chose to present would say a lot about who we thought she was. Anastasia or Alexandra are guesses with very little historical proof. Roxolana was the Western world's adaptation, a way of letting them connect with her. After all, Ruthenia was technically European and not Persian. And Hürrem was the pet name given to her by a man who owned her. And while I truly hope that she reciprocated his love, there is always the possibility that she chose to devote herself to his happiness out of self-preservation or for the sake of her children. But I do think that she was treated lovingly, and we'll get into the details, but he did eventually free her and officially married her, which was absolutely shocking for the time. And because of that, I have to hope that the feelings were mutual. For that reason, I've decided to go with Hürrem, the name given to her by her partner in life.
It's horrifying to think that she might have lived her life pretending to be in love.
It would be terribly sad if that were the case, and she definitely wouldn't be the first, nor sadly will she be the last woman to have to pretend. But as it is Valentine's Day, I say let's choose happiness. The Ottoman Empire believed in their love, and so we will too. There were rumors that her father was an Orthodox priest, which certainly makes her conversion to Islam much more exciting for the Muslim world, but there really isn't much conclusive evidence to support this. Hürrem was taken from her home by the Ottoman slave trade. The empire organized frequent enslavement expeditions, and during Suleiman's era, it is conjectured that up to 1/5 of the population were slaves.
That is an incredible percentage. Guess I didn't realize how active the slave trade was in the Ottoman Empire.
They just had to fill up the harems. No, I'm just kidding. The English word slave actually comes from the Slav, slave trade, which was just a part of life in the Black Sea region since really ancient times. Tatars, which is a general term for Turkic ethnic groups living in the northern and central Asian landmasses, were very frequent raiders. Ruthenia, specifically, was ravaged by the Tatars of the Crimean Khanate, who made yearly incursions into Hürrem's supposed homeland. Yearly. She was captured sometime between 1509 and 1519. We really don't know her personal story. But by 1520, the year Suleiman took the throne, she was a polished concubine. We can make a few assumptions about her character. First, she was tenacious. Captured at such a young age, it is almost unbelievable that she managed to survive at all. Slave raids usually occurred during the winter, and prisoners often just perished of cold. They were poorly fed and forcibly marched on foot in chains thousands of miles. The journey is enshrined in Slavic folklore. One Ukrainian folk song that I found sings of the devastation. Quote, "The fires are burning behind the river. The Tatars are dividing their captives. Our village is burnt and our property plundered. Old mother is sabred, and my dear is taken into captivity."
That is incredibly brutal.
Yeah, and it's in song form.
Yeah, these outlying towns prone to attack must have been absolutely terrified of imminent raids.
And they knew they were coming every year. The raids could take between 5,000 or even up to 40,000 people at a time. Holy cow. I mean, that's a lot of people to manage to...
Are you kidding? Even on the low side,
5,000 people is a pain in the butt to organize.
I was a fourth grade teacher, and managing 24 students to and from the lunchroom was a lot.
Yeah, so in their chains,
My children were not in chains going to the lunchroom, I will say that.
Oh, thank God. Yeah, otherwise this would be the end of our podcast.
Forever.
Career. So what they didn't take, what they didn't plunder, they pretty much just burned as well. So for Hürrem, though please remember that this was not her name at the time. We don't know what it was. But for Hürrem to survive, she must have been brave, strong, and resilient. All of which would prove essential in her life to come. Suleiman had 17 women in his harem when Hürrem was first noticed. He already had at least 4 children, all from different concubines, 3 of which were sons. The harem was in many ways a meritocracy. A woman's capacity to compete spelled her success or her failure. At first, there was likely no reason to think that her relationship would be any different from the others. But to even capture his attention, she must have sparkled. And once noticed, Hürrem would have been prepared for her first night with the Sultan. And most importantly, she must be a virgin.
The universal must. Women must be pure, so men can, better enjoy them? Can you tell that this is a rant of mine, a soapbox I love to pontificate from?
It is a soapbox of the podcast. Yes, I wholeheartedly concur, but that is the case. She would have actually been inspected by the palace officials, and frankly, it's a miracle that she survived this traumatic capture with her virginity intact.
Well, and another thing, heaven forbid the woman ride a frickin' horse.
Yeah, I don't know what they did about that situation. Some scholars have argued that she was likely chosen for the harem very early in the journey due to her striking looks, and that is the reason she was able to remain a virgin throughout this miserable journey, because otherwise,
Caroline, this is horrifying. This is supposed to be our happily ever after episode.
I know, I'm really sorry. They are going to get married, if that helps. Okay. I can't begin to guess at her feelings that first night. Suleiman was known to be handsome, and he was young, likely 10 years older than her, maybe even less, which certainly made the task ahead less repulsive. Imagine the fate of a concubine who joins the harem late in the Sultan's reign, after decades of war and women with...
Nope, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm good. Couldn't be me.
I presume that for most of the women, they still did not want this sexual encounter with the Sultan. He was, after all, technically their master. And there was absolutely no choice given to these women, and some of them, frankly, were still girls. However, most, or perhaps all, understood that sleeping with him would ensure their survival. Getting pregnant, moreover, would ensure their future. There really is no sugarcoating this situation. She was an enslaved woman forced to sleep with her master, and she was well prepared for it. Far more than your average mother-daughter sex talks, I have to assume. Her survival hinged on how well she pleased her master. So, in preparation, she was taken to the Hall of Maidens, which was in the new palace near the Sultan's rooms. Here, she would be bathed and dressed, and in a modestly alluring gown, she would be led to the Sultan's private quarters by eunuchs when he was ready for her.
Oh God, that's so nerve-wracking. Like, I can't even imagine the pressure this moment has, like, built up.
Well, and she is a virgin, so this is a first for her, even though there's so much writing on it. She just has to wait until he's ready.
What does he gotta get ready for? She's the one that's had to be bathed and dressed and dolled up as, like, this sacrificial lamb.
That's true. I think it was more when his meetings were over, and he was like, it's time. But I don't know.
Isn't it amazing as a man you can just, it's time.
It's time, exactly. So she's paraded in there, as you say, like a lamb to the slaughter. And I think there's just a major ickiness factor.
Mm-hmm.
One of the books I read by Leslie Pierce, which was a fantastic account of Hürrem's life, said, quote, Suleiman was no stranger to initiating a virgin slave into her role as a concubine.
Oh, yeah. See, there is the ickiness. There's the icky, cringy, awful there.
Ick. So cringy. Usually, a sultan spent time with a new concubine for 2 months. If during this time she fell pregnant, she was kept further. And I am using the word kept. If not, he was under no obligation to continue the relationship. And actually, I want to clarify that he never had to continue the relationship. If after a first meeting, she was not his cup of tea, he could politely choose to release her from his service. She was not freed. She was just no longer required to sleep with him.
That is the most intense speed dating service that I've ever heard of, and I don't like it.
No. Fortunately, or perhaps I should say fatefully, because it depends on one's interpretation of their relationship, Hürrem was to his liking. And she fell pregnant within a very short period of time. Their first child was a son named Mehmed, and he arrived while Suleiman was absent, off on a military campaign.
Boy, don't we know about that.
Yes, boy, don't we know about that. Cannons announced his birth. All of Istanbul celebrated because he was the first royal child born in the capital for over 45 years.
But what about the other 4 children he had?
So he did have 4 other children, but they had all been born while he was still a prince, governing and living in a faraway province.
Yep, not in the purple, so to speak.
Not in the purple. Mehmed was his first child after ascending the throne, and his birth almost mirrored the rebirth of the dynasty, reinvigorating it with a young, strong, potent sultan.
And after all, his dad was a murder-happy old dude. I guess I can see that.
Yeah, I think the people were ready for something slightly better.
Slightly better. Wouldn't it be nice?
Slightly better. And even better, Suleiman returned shortly after the birth, parading through the city in triumph. He and his armies had captured Belgrade. The first military campaign of his reign had been a spectacular success. But, tragically, he was greeted with the news that 2 of his young children had died just 2 days before his return home. Furthering his grief, his firstborn son, who was 9 years old at the time, followed his half-siblings to the grave only 10 days later. All 3 likely died of the plague, and this left Suleiman with just 2 surviving children, the infant Mehmed and the 7-year-old Mustafa.
He must have been devastated to lose 3 in such short succession of one another.
I think we can't imagine the pain. And for Suleiman, these children were not only his flesh and blood, they were his dynasty's future. For Hürrem, however, the first months after giving birth were a time of celebration. She had fulfilled her purpose, and now she was secure in her position within the palace. She could no longer be sold or given away, and would automatically be freed after her master's death. So after Mehmed's birth, Hürrem would have expected her life to change. She should now turn all her attention to her son, whom she was to shepherd through life in hopes that he would one day become sultan. Even if she had developed feelings for Suleiman, she must rein them in. Her life as a sexual partner was over. Except it wasn't.
Well, that would make for a pretty sad love story, Caroline. Knocked up and abandoned isn't exactly a Hollywood ending.
Yeah, agreed. As I said, Suleiman was a maverick. His love for Hürrem spurred him to challenge conventions and torpedo traditions. But while they may have lived happily ever after, their love had deadly consequences. Tune in next week and see if you can keep track of the body count. And not the good kind.
Oh, Lord.
Fine. Tune in next week to hear one of history's most famous love stories.
Much better.
Let's see if love can conquer all. And you can decide if it was worth the lives it cost.
You're killing me, man. Come back and listen to Caroline turn a perfectly good love story into a horror film.
Here for you. Till next time, I'm Caroline.
And I'm Erica. And we are pithily yours.
This episode is brought to you by the Pithy Chronicle, LLC. The Pithy Chronicle is intended for education, entertainment, and non-commercial purposes. Any views or opinions expressed in this podcast are personal and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the owner may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity. While we offer lots of sarcasm, this podcast does not offer any advice or services. Listening to this podcast may induce fits of laughter, unexpected distraction, or uncontrollable rage at the subjects, hopefully not at us. We hope you learned something today. If not, so sorry. Please be advised we are not experts in the following fields: medical, legal, financial, technological, thermonuclear engineering, submarine warfare, neuroscience, or cat husbandry. Thanks for listening to our little disclaimer. Just covering our history-loving asses. Bye!